The Commissioner of Major League Soccer, Don Garber, does not need a long introduction, and we've got quite a lot of topical stuff to get to today, an exciting time in the football world, and especially in Major League Soccer. Before we get into Major League Soccer, we've been talking about a lot of global issues this week here at Soccerex, especially the FIFA election, some things happening soon. So let's dive right in, if we could. Loretta Lynch from the U.S. government is going to be in Zurich September 14th to talk with the Swiss more about her findings. And there's been talk even on this stage this week that there are potentially going to be some more dominoes at some point. Again, just conjecture, whether it's arrests, developments, et cetera in this case. You're involved in U.S. soccer, Commissioner of Major League Soccer. A lot of this is generated from the States. Can you tell us at this point, yourself, U.S. soccer, Major League Soccer, completely clean, not going to be part of this at all going forward?
100%.
Very confident. Good. Something else that came out of FIFA.
That was a quick, easy answer.
That's simple. It's a cut and paste. It's a clip and save. We saw FIFA's head of reform recently come out with some interesting comments. I'm just going to read them. He said that football in America is a, quote, ethnic sport for schoolgirls, and that, quote, soccer is not a true American sport. Anything you'd like to say to Mr. Gerard?
Well, first, that he couldn't be more wrong. The great thing about our country is the diversity of it, and the fact that we are made up from people from just about every country from around the world. And when you think about this sport, which is such a global sport, frankly, it couldn't be more American. I can remember many, many years ago hearing a similar quote. An article was written in one of our local newspapers, and I wrote an op-ed piece in the New York Times. I think it was after the World Cup in 2002, and saying that of all of the sports in our country, this is perhaps the most American based on what we are, what we represent, gender equality, a commitment to diversity. So factually incorrect. There are 80 million soccer fans in our country, the #1 market for people traveling to Brazil from the World Cup, the largest market for FIFA broadcast rights. 27 million people watched the final in 2014. The vast majority of them watched it on ESPN, which is an English language broadcaster, a 20-year-old league that's attracting 21,500 people on average to our games. So the facts are wrong. But frankly, I guess I'm getting a little heated up here, you gotta hope that when you have those that are responsible for reform or governing our sport, that you'd look at a country like ours, which is committed to diversity and has a women's program that is the best in the world, and applaud it, and frankly not treat it with disdain.
Do you think his opinion is a prevailing one around the world at all, or is he in the minority?
I think he is in the minority. Clearly we're an emerging soccer nation, and there's a lot of history with our sport. It goes back 100 years. Association football came over from the UK 100 years ago. Our FA Cup, the US Open Cup, is the oldest sporting competition in America. But when you think about us on the world stage, our national team, though qualifying since 1990, the men's national team is doing well, but it hasn't won a World Cup yet. Our league's only 20 years old and is emerging. Our country and Canada, we have 3 clubs in Canada, so our collective countries are doing everything we can to be part of the global football or soccer conversation. And we're going to continue to invest and try to be part of doing what we can to grow the game. We feel pretty good about where we are now, but we've got a long, long way to go before people think about the United States like they think about football in Germany or France or Italy or Spain or here in England.
One last question about FIFA before we move on to Major League Soccer. Actually, he was on the stage this week as Royal Highness Prince Ali sat here. And reportedly, as soon as today, if he hasn't already, he's going to be announcing his candidacy for president of FIFA. Last time around, U.S. Soccer supported him in that effort. Is U.S. Soccer going to back him again this time? Do you know?
You know, that's been a question for Sunil Gulati, who everybody here probably knows pretty well. I'm on that board, and I'm sure the board will get together at the right time and figure out who we will support, and then hopefully have whatever influence we can at the CONCACAF level.
Okay.
But Prince Ali is a good guy, and I think he's got some good plans.
Let's talk about Major League Soccer. So we're here to talk about the 20th season of the league. Wow, it's been 20 years already, and what's going to happen now and into the future. But not always an easy road, huh? Tell us about how we got to this point.
You know, the sport, as I said, is new, 20 years compared to the 100 years of football around the world, or our leagues. The 4 other major leagues in our country are all over 100 years old. We're college students now. We're no longer toddlers, but our toddler and infant days were pretty difficult. The league was founded right after the World Cup in 1994. At a time when the sport was growing. The World Cup in '94 was very successful. It was the highest attended World Cup of all time, and it will be if we ever get the World Cup back in the United States. But getting it all right took a lot of vision from our owners and a lot of sweat and blood. Some contraction in the early years, trying to reconfigure our system to figure out what was the right investment. Most importantly, the original plan didn't include the investment in soccer stadiums. We now have 15 facilities that are built just for our sport. We'll have 3 more in the next couple of years. That's a multi-billion-dollar commitment from our ownership, and those are difficult. You know, New York City and Miami and Chicago and LA and Houston are all really mature cities and difficult to get big buildings constructed. And it also took us a while to figure out the right kind of players to attract an ever-growing knowledge base. As our national team got better and our league became attracting the attention of those around the world, we needed to figure out how to do that. How could we afford it with revenues that are still modest compared to the other leagues? But overall, I'd say in our 20th season, we feel pretty good about where we are. Our best days are clearly still ahead, though.
You said, though, a couple of years back, I think it was, that the MLS is a league on the rise, and that momentum was happening. Is that still the case? Has it gotten to the place where you hoped it would a couple of years ago?
I do think it's still a league on the rise, Ben. We're not fully expanded. I'm sure we'll talk about that a bit. We haven't quite figured out the right mix of players that our clubs sign. We're investing more money today in our academy programs than we spent on our rosters even 5 years ago. And just the whole idea of academies in the United States and Canada are brand new. Didn't exist in the early days of MLS, and it certainly didn't in the previous iterations of Pro Division I soccer. So I think when we take a step back in our 20th season, every game is broadcast in English and Spanish and in French. All of our games are broadcast locally. America and Canada have local television broadcasters. We're very engaged in social media and digital media. All of our games are available via our MLS app. Lots and lots of developments. But I still think that as our country and Canada become more influential and become more soccer nations, like I think we're rapidly becoming, that will have a positive impact on our league. And I think if it is good for Major League Soccer, ultimately, I think if we're able to be smart, it should be helpful to everybody else that's involved in the game around the world.
Okay. You talked about the lean times of the league where you went through contraction, getting rid of a couple teams at times, things like that. And then now it's a point where you're feeling very good about things. How does that happen? If I'm a young league or a old league that's looking to on the rise, what's worked for you? What are the tricks of the trade that have helped you grow the league back to the point where you're no longer talking about getting rid of teams, rather it's how many we're going to be adding?
Well, you know, I think it starts with, and again, our system is different than other parts of the world, but committed owners. You know, our owners own Premier League clubs and Serie A clubs, and own clubs in Germany, and they own baseball teams, basketball teams, football teams, and hockey teams, and they really are big believers in our country and Canada growing as soccer nations, and they've committed massive resources to it. It starts with that, and then it just includes a plan, and you've got to spend the time, no different than any business, working on creating a strategic plan. We go through that process annually. We have quarterly reviews. We hire the same consultants that big companies hire to be sure that we're dealing with proper research and proper analytics, investing in lots of research and going and having fan panels. We have 20,000 people on a panel that have agreed to be a really large focus group for us. And we're talking to them about all sorts of things that we need to do that make us smarter and allow us to make good decisions. And then lastly, it involves courage, man. You got to have some guts, and you got to be willing to work hard and just slug it out if you believe, and I do, that soccer has got a great future in our country and in Canada. I think all of the metrics are working in our favor. We have a country that's made up of every country from around the world. We've got lots of young millennials that have grown up with the game. We are the second most popular sport in our country among millennials after the NFL. And if you think about all those factors that are happening, globalization that's bringing the other pro leagues into our country via digital, social, and broadcast media, all those things are working in our favor. But if things aren't working, you got to get in a room, and we have that ability to operate as a board and take the tough decisions. And it was really hard to fold a team in Miami. And here we are today talking about getting back there and having a great guy like David Beckham be the owner of the team. We moved the team from San Jose to Houston, and because we couldn't get a stadium built, we were playing in a really old college football stadium. And then 3 years later, we were back with the San Jose Earthquakes. Dave Cavill was here. They've got a brand new, beautiful stadium in downtown San Jose. They've sold out every game since they've built that stadium. So sometimes you got to take a little pain.
Yeah. We'll get back to Miami in a second, but you mentioned ownership, which is interesting. How's it been attracting ownership domestically, internationally, given your structure? I know, obviously, the club right down the road just put a team in New York starting this year. How's that gone, and what does your structure do to either help or hinder that investment?
Well, I'll start with the structure, which is certainly of intrigue for the rest of the world. I mean, this idea that owners can come together and be partners off the field and try to beat the heck out of each other on the field is a model that's worked really well in the U.S. with its other pro leagues that are arguably amongst the most valuable and successful pro leagues in the world in various sports. So it is attractive to some that have been involved in other businesses and see how difficult it is to operate when you're competing in an environment that has no structure to it. They look at this, and while it is different, it is attractive to them and allows for some ability to plan and to invest over a long period of time. And how does America or the soccer community benefit? Massive, massive foundations and bricks and mortars that are put together that will create a league that will be around 100 years from now. And that commitment is attractive, and ultimately the teams that they're investing in become more valuable, even if they could be losing money on a day-to-day basis. So it has become a bit of a seller's market. I think there's way more interest in investing in MLS today than there are teams that are for sale, whether new or existing. But when I got into the league 16 years ago, we couldn't give a team away for the losses. Mm-hmm. And literally we were trying to figure out how do we do it, and had to shut down some teams because we couldn't operate them. Right. And that's a relatively short period of time in the lifespan of a business. To go from there 0 to the most recent sale was over $100 million.
Since we are sitting here in this town, how is the Manchester City owned team in New York doing? Yeah? They're
great. New York City FC is playing in Yankee Stadium, which is a unique environment while they try to get a stadium built in New York City, which is no easy task. But they're averaging over 30,000 fans a game. They've signed Pirlo and Lampard and David Villa, who's been doing extremely well, a bunch of young kids and a great national team player, Mix Dixelrud. They're not doing as well on the field as I think they probably thought they would, but boy, it's taken over our city. They've attracted enormous attention. It's kind of become the place to be, and that's a little better than we thought. And they've done a great job. Ferran Soriano, for those of you who don't know him, is a brilliant guy and has a great vision for expanding the city brand globally.
There was actually some fan violence trouble between the two New York teams recently, between fans of the Red Bulls and NYCFC. Is that good, bad?
Well, I wouldn't describe it as fan violence per se. You had some New York City fans that were trying to make some noise outside a Red Bull fan bar. But it's just, that's really not part of the culture of our sporting landscape. I think all of us in our business, frankly, it's one of the things I think about the most, security overall, and how do we ensure that our stadiums, our movie theaters, our malls, and other public environments are safe. But one of the things we're not really having to face is any of those issues, fortunately.
But deep down, we like that passion a little bit, don't we?
Passion's good, but passion, too much passion's bad.
All right. You mentioned Mr. Beckham before. What's going on with him? There's been all this talk that he's going to be an owner in Miami at some point. We keep hearing different things. Can you tell us what's going on there?
Well, they're making a lot of progress, Ben. You know, David, you guys probably know him better than we do. You know, he's been part of our world for 6 years or so. Very smart, very focused, have a great life post-football, and loves our country, loves our league, and wants to own a team, and has had a lot of fits and starts with trying to find the right site for a stadium. We've learned, particularly over the last 5 to 10 years, that the right building in the right location is key to success in Major League Soccer. Market size is less of importance, but you got to have the right building. And in the rest of the world, those Bernabeu's been around. You don't have to really worry about building a new Bernabeu, but we've got to create that new story for us. And David's making progress, more so than ever before. It's a site at the former Orange Bowl where the University of Miami used to play. It's adjacent to the Marlins Arena where the MLB team plays, and I'm pretty confident we'll get something done soon.
Does that mean you could potentially announce something this year, or?
I hope so. I hope so.
Okay. Let's talk about expansion in general. You're 20 teams now with a plan in place to go to 24. How do you make that decision to expand right now? I mean, the country's so massive, but other leagues have many more teams than you do right now. Talk about that decision of when and how to build a new franchise.
I think it starts with the market and with fans wanting to support an MLS team in their city. And when you think about having concentric circles around the U.S. and Canada and creating a regional and national footprint, that's what creates the drama of national support. The NFL has the television ratings it has, not just because it's the most popular sport in America, but because they're covering every part of the country, and everybody has a local team, and we're still not in a third of the largest, population of 350 million people. Really big cities that don't have an MLS team, so they don't have the ability to support a club and create that dynamic that families grow up in, the history that exists here and other parts of the world. So it starts with demand, then it goes into our owners who are partners deciding whether or not they're interested in being diluted, bringing in another partner, and then ensuring that we have the right building and then the right ownership group and then the right plan in place. It requires those three things: the right market, the right owner, and the right facility.
Sorry, go ahead.
3 more teams coming in by the end of the decade. Atlanta's already been announced, and they have 25,000 season tickets, and they don't play for another 2 years, which is pretty remarkable. LAFC will come in 2018. They've just announced a stadium in downtown LA, which is also something that's pretty remarkable. That stadium will be open in 2018. Your hometown, Minneapolis, is making a lot of progress and could be our 23rd team. David's Miami team will be 24, and then we'll see where we go from there.
Well, let's talk about that right now. How quickly then do you want to keep going, or is 24 a good number to be at for a while?
Well, we said we wanted to get to 20, and then all of a sudden we went to 24, which will be by the end of the decade. And again, I know this is sort of very different for the rest of the world. I mean, our pro leagues in America have 30 and 32 teams in it, and they're covering this massive population across 3 time zones. One of the big challenges, if you speak to Gerard or Lampard or Villa or David or Thierry Henry, is it's a lot different to be an Arsenal player, David, and get in the bus and then go home for dinner at night with your family, and you've got 5 of your teams, I guess, in your neighborhood. Or our guys are going from LA to Vancouver, which is 6,000 miles, and that's a long way away. So having regional competition and conference-based competition, I think it's not 6,000 miles, it's 4,000 miles, but still a long way away. And that dynamic is just different for us, and we've got to figure that out. We've got to figure out how to organize it. And fortunately, we don't have to think that through until we're ready to do it.
So do you have a target, a goal, if we want to get to 30 teams
No.
by a certain time?
No.
Okay. The other thing that factors into that, you talked about dilution of an ownership stake, but when you add a team, it's also diluting the player pool. How much is that playing into it, especially given what's going on in the transfer market around the world?
You know, it's a good question. And, you know, when the NFL expands, if they do expand, there are only X number of football players, and they all play in the NFL. One of the great things about our sport, it's a global market. There are tens of thousands of professional players with ITCs. If you expand, sit down with Sunil Gulati and talk about the international player limit. We do have a limit of domestic and of international players so that we can grow our national team, and that's worked pretty effectively. Dilution is less of an issue for us than it is in the other leagues. We increase our salary budgets. We change the rules a bit to have more homegrown players and ensure that the quality goes up. Our league has expanded dramatically over the last 10 years, and the quality of our league undoubtedly has improved. So don't think it's an issue for us.
I was sitting with the former England center back who was here speaking yesterday, and he was talking to me about his thoughts of your league. And one of the first things he said is it will never be a real league until they have promotion and relegation. Will that ever happen in Major League Soccer, and why or why not?
Well, first, I don't believe that's true.
Okay.
You know, I think a real league in whose eyes? I think we're a real league now. You know, we have a real business. We've got north of 20,000 people coming to our games. We have our games live on Sky, our games live on Eurosport. They're live all around the world. I don't know how anybody could say it's not a real league. The question is, will it be the Premier League, right? And I don't know the answer to that, and that's not something we really need to address today. We look at the fact that we play in a market where the major leagues are really successful, and we get the fact that we're part of a global landscape. We're participating in the global sport. But there's no promotion or relegation in hockey. There's no promotion or relegation in basketball, and they work pretty well. So I'm not sure if you were going to start professional soccer starting in 2016, and you were going to figure it all out whether promotion relegation would be part of the landscape. But it's not happening in Major League Soccer anytime soon.
Okay.
I still think we'll be fine.
I think you'll make it. You mentioned EPL, though, not the EPL. What is your goal for MLS? There's been, I mean, the players who have come over recently, guys like Stevie Gerrard, have had really good things to say. They've been surprised by the quality, even in training and the matches and all that. You hear all the talk about it's inevitable at some point that MLS is going to be a major league, top 3, 4, 5 in the world. What is your goal and when?
So it's a good question. I mean, we have an overall goal. Every entity should have a goal. Our vision goal is to be one of the top leagues in the world. We set that goal when we were bidding for the World Cup in 2022. We funded a lot of that through the league. We went through that process. We lost, and we could have gone home and said, well, we're not going to have the World Cup in 22. Let's change our vision. And I sat with our owners, and I said, that would have been really cowardly, frankly. So we said, this is going to be our vision by 22. We want to be among the best. It'll be generations and generations before we are literally playing at the level of the Premier League or playing at the level of the Bundesliga. But that's okay. We just want to be part of the conversation so that when Sebastian Giovinco is playing for Juventus and has got choices as to where he could play, having him look at Toronto and thinking that Major League Soccer could be his league of choice. When a young American kid is growing up and has an opportunity to go to an academy, rather than necessarily go over to England or go over to Spain, we'd like him to have as a choice to play for an MLS academy. We'd like broadcasters and sponsors and fans to think about MLS as a league of choice. And I think that is happening already. It will happen over time. And if we're able to stick to our knitting and continue to invest, I think in 10 years' time, the league will be part of that group of top leagues. That's certainly our goal.
A question I hear is, why is it going to take so long? People look at America and, there's so much money there and massive stadiums and all that, and why don't you just start buying, competing in the international transfer market and bring the level of the league up right away?
Well, it's a good question, but it would make no economic sense. And our entire structure is based on being sensible. We've seen the fact that the NASL in the 70s went out of business. We've seen post that a number of new pro soccer leagues in our country that went out of business. We've seen what happens in the world of global football. We have owners that own Premier League clubs, and we see some of the challenges of competing. And this structure that we have is in place to ensure that when that tide comes, that we'll be here to be able to take advantage of that. And that tide is coming. the growth of the sport is just happening naturally in our country and in Canada, and we want to be here taking advantage of it when it hits. And to just go chase it, we've got a lot of wealthy owners. Certainly the folks in Man City could have a $100 million roster if they wanted to in New York City, but it would make no sense. It wouldn't be competitively balanced. And we are very committed as Yanks to this idea that in the beginning of every season, every fan should have the thought that their team could win a championship. And that fact that you're not just shooting to get relegated, you're not shooting to maybe make Europa, maybe to make the Champions League, and maybe, if we're lucky, we'll win the championship. That's just not something we subscribe to. We want somebody in Kansas City, even though they're smaller than New York, to think that they could hoist the trophy. And in our 20 years, 9 teams, different teams, have been champions. And that's just part of our goofy character, I guess, that I think makes our league different, but one that's working in our part of the world.
We talked about this with the executives from France just before you took the stage. You mentioned the, not parity, but the competition.
Competitive balance.
There you go, competitive balance across Major League Soccer. But the clubs for Major League Soccer, there's a tournament in the region called the CONCACAF Champions Cup. Same thing as a UEFA Champions League here. And it's not something MLS teams win. It's not something that they have a tremendous amount of success in. Would you rather see a couple super clubs kind of emerge that could give you more success there potentially? Is the competitive balance, as you call it, at the cost of competing abroad?
It's a good question, and frankly, it's a fair one. But I think if you were going to strip it all apart, our performance in the Champions League is as much related to the fact that we play on a very different calendar, and we are abiding in that tournament by the world calendar, and our teams are coming in and qualifying in February before our rosters are even together. So it is in our preseason. We did get into the final this year and unfortunately lost up in Montreal. I think we'll eventually win the Champions League. I think our clubs are getting more competitive against the Mexican teams, and there's been more investment in trying to ensure that they're focused from a schedule perspective on that tournament. But I don't think the answer is to have a super club, because I think the pot at the end of the rainbow is not winning the Champions League. The pot at the end of the rainbow is being one of the top soccer leagues in the world.
Okay.
And I think our commitment to structure is what will allow us to get there. Sometimes it's hard to get there and not take the easy path.
Yeah, that makes sense. You mentioned MLS. We've talked a lot about it on the global stage, and we'll come back to that in a second. But how is it doing in America vis-a-vis the other leagues, attendance-wise? I mean, obviously, the National Football League is kind of off on its own planet in the U.S., but among the other leagues, how is Major League Soccer faring?
Better than we thought, probably better than most people in the audience would expect. Our average attendance is higher than the NBA's and the NHL's, albeit they have many more games. But that 21,500 puts our league in the top 10 in the world, and that's a positive. Our fan base is, as I mentioned before, second most popular sport among young people after the NFL, so ahead of the NBA and NASCAR and Major League Baseball and hockey. That bodes very well for us. That millennial population grew up with the game, following our national teams, and now has many more MLS teams to support. Television ratings-wise, there's a vast difference between our ratings and those of the NBA and the NFL, but we're making a lot of progress. Interestingly, we don't compare ourselves as much to the major leagues as it relates to our fan base. Great analogy or factoid is NYCFC's got almost 20,000 or 17,000, 18,000 season tickets. 60% of them have never owned a season ticket before.
In any sport.
In any sport. And that's a great, surprising fact for us. So I think our competition is more, are they a fan of Mexican, of the Club America or Chivas? Are they a fan of Arsenal or Man City? Are they a fan of Barca or of Real Madrid? And now that that team is in their community, can they take that affinity and turn it into something that's right in their neighborhood and wave a flag? And if you've seen some of the images, the environments in our stadiums are really remarkable.
We've talked a little bit about the league's reputation. How do you think it is abroad? How do you think the reputation of MLS is here in the UK, around the world?
I've said this before, Ben. I think the perception of our league is probably greater outside the U.S. than it is inside the U.S. You've got a lot of soccer folks in our country that have not been born on MLS, and they've come into the game following international clubs or whatever, and they're a tougher nut to crack. You know, I've spent a couple of days doing media in London yesterday and earlier today, and we have a brand new relationship with Sky. I met with the CEO yesterday, and boy, he was just raving about MLS. Our television ratings, the New York City-LA game won the day on Sky. We're doing very well on Eurosport. The international players that come into the league are, I think, surprised at the level of play and the environment in our stadiums and the seriousness of our staffs. And that drama that's created is positive for us, and then hopefully it circles back. But I think it's pretty good.
Why does the Sky deal help so much? I hear it too when I'm listening to the radio or whatever. You just hear more chatter about Major League Soccer here in the UK.
Hey, it's very specific, Ben. First of all, they're doing a good job of getting access from us that they don't get from the other leagues. It's just the culture of American media relationships is so totally different than it is in other parts of the world. I say this to others. There are a lot of things that people look at as I say, boy, you guys are really goofy in how you go about building a proper soccer league. And then there are a handful of things we do. They say, man, I wish we had that here in England. I met with a renowned reporter earlier, and he was at the LA game, and he went into a locker room for the first time in his career. And I said, there were the players in their underwear. And man, I was just shocked. I said, if that happened in the UK, it would be shut down in 30 seconds because we wouldn't know what to do and we'd probably write or take a picture of something. So we have this access that we're providing to Sky and to the English press and the other foreign press, which is giving them the ability to speak to players in a different environment. It's not just post-game. They're inside and immersed in what goes on because that's what we do. You're in the Super Bowl and you just are down 40-0, and the first thing the coach that's losing is a microphone in his mouth in front of 110 people saying, what do you think about what's going on? And we do that at MLS games. So that environment, I think, has been positive and giving the Skies of the world a way to paint pictures and do highlights and get features that are just elevating our league.
So the key to growth of a soccer league is players in their underwear.
There you go.
Okay, duly noted. Good. That should have been your answer when we asked about the tricks
Probably
of the trade before.
Shouldn't have said the thing about the underwear, but Ben's going to put that on Twitter. Get fried.
Exactly.
Don't do that.
Yeah, I want to talk to you about your role in in kind of the world game we had. For instance, we had a chat here about refereeing, about some trials they want to do in Holland with instant replay and the whole idea of what they would need to do to get to that point. How are your interactions with FIFA from a governance standpoint? What's the league's life like there?
Well, we have interactions with FIFA. None of them yet are on the governance side. I mean, that's a process that's being handled very independently of anyone on the league side, and probably anyone on the national association side. On the officiating side, it's an interesting one, and most people probably don't know this. Like our league being immature and very young, and our players being young, our officiating corps is similarly young. They haven't been doing this for as long as they've been doing it here in the UK. We did create a relationship that looks very much like the structure here in England. It's called PRO, the Professional Referees Organization. It's based in the MLS office, but it is run independently, funded by the league, by Canada Association, and by US Soccer. We're assessing, we're assigning, we're doing all the training and everything in an environment that more closely resembles what would happen in the other leagues, though clearly independent and under the banner of US Soccer. We've been testing instant replay. We're believers in it. Okay. And I've spent time with Mr. Van Praag. I know that the Dutch are as well. I looked at, as I was waiting in the lounge coming over here the other night, and I saw Andy Murray try to contest what could have been a critical point. And had that ball been out, maybe Murray wins the tournament. It was in, and the Hawkeye was able to find it. I don't know what's bad about that. I actually think that getting things right is good. That being said, it's got to fit within the confines of ensuring that the game's not stopped and doing all the things that everyone who's been at this a lot longer than we have will find acceptable. But we're believers, and I'd be a big advocate for finding the right way to ensure that it could make the game better. At the end of the day, and that's all anybody is trying to do with technology. And there's no agenda other than improvement.
Okay, well, you do run a league, You could probably just implement it, no?
We can't. We can't just implement it. We've got to do it in a way that is in accordance with the powers that be. But we have raised our hand over the years and says, we'll be your guinea pig. You guys look at us as being odd anyway. So why don't you just use our league and let us do it, and we'll figure out for everybody else whether it makes sense. I think if you do it right, it will work.
Is there anything?
Frankly, I think it will happen in time. It's just a matter of time.
Is there anything imminent there with trials?
Yeah, we have been testing it. We have gone to U.S. Soccer and tried to get permission to test it in one of our lower divisions, which we have a relationship with. We've exposed the trial to our ownership group. It really does work.
Okay.
And it'll be a fun thing to show the next Soccerex, some of the tests that have been done.
Okay, great. Let's talk about players a little bit. We've mentioned it a little bit. We've obviously had high-profile imports coming this year. Pirlo, Lampard, Gerrard, people like that. Didier Drogba just had a hat-trick in his first start up in Montreal. Those guys are all over 30, though. When people say that MLS is just a retirement league, what's your answer to that?
Well, it isn't. The average age of the 35 players that we signed in the window was 27. It's just that people pay attention to the top 4 or 5 big world-class names, and that's good. That's why we signed them. Part of that is to create drama and to create attract attention and get more people to watch our games on television, because they have the opportunity to see Drogba the year before when he's playing for Chelsea, and they're watching him on a Premier League broadcast on NBC. He's now playing in Montreal. We want him to watch that game on TSN. So there is a strategy about signing guys like that. We had 1 million people watch the Galaxy New York game, and it was covered around the world. More people watched outside the United States, frankly, than watched inside the U.S., which is interesting. But at the end of the day, it is about Sebastian Giovinco and Michael Bradley, guys in their early 20s who are making as much money as the guys like Lampard and Gerrard, and committing to guys in the prime of their career. The time will come when people will think about us in the prime of their career, and we'll be in that market, but that time's probably far in our future.
You mentioned Seb Giovinco, who came from Juventus, a young player, national team player, and at the end of this season, unless there's a bit of a scandal, should be named most valuable player in the league in his first year. He's torn the league up. He's done really well. Is that a sign of things to come? Do you expect that the league is going to compete more on the international transfer market for a elite player like that who is at a much younger age?
I do, and I think it'll be limited, but I do. I think Sebastian's a great example of that. And again, that we have the ability to look at what is the investment in that player and how is it paying off economically, because that actually does matter to somebody. Somebody's got to write that check. And that's been a good investment on the part of Toronto. They went from 18,000 fans going to their games. They're averaging over 25,000 now. There's actually a analysis you could do that shows that it makes sense. But more importantly, it just raises the overall profile of the league. He's not just good, but he's a really committed guy. He's doing a lot of good stuff off the field. Great signing. And for all those here, Robbie Keane's probably the best signing in the history of the league, and we signed him sort of in the prime of his career. He's been tearing up our league for 5 years, our MVP last year, great season this year. So there have been quite a few players in that sort of late 20s, 30-ish, still prime.
And Robbie's still starting and starring for the Irish national team as well.
And
so.
Sebastian was called into, until he got hurt, the Italian national team, so that was good. We didn't expect that.
Yeah. If you haven't seen Giovinco play, find the next Toronto game on Sky. He's about this tall, and he's amazing. They call him the atomic ant, right?
It's great.
Yeah, he's fantastic. Another, you mentioned, I just want to touch on, because I guess we should bring it up. I feel like you get asked it all the time, but you mentioned the fact that you don't play on the FIFA calendar, on the international calendar. Is that ever going to change, or is this the way Major League Soccer is going to be calendar-wise, which starts in the spring and goes through till the end of the year?
I wish the answer to that could be yes, because it is really challenging for us to not be on the calendar. We had a game that was played this weekend just for calendar congestion issues, and it was a FIFA weekend, and we were missing 15 players. Now, the good part of that is 5 players on Dallas played their first team match, and they were homegrown players out of their academies, so there's always a balance to challenges. But we live I'm sure everybody here is aware of this. I mean, we go from the desert to the frozen tundra in our country, and we have teams in all of those climates. And to start any earlier than March, which is difficult already, is almost, if not today, impossible unless we had dome stadiums, and that's a long way away. So we looked at the model. The model requires us to start in February, And you can't do that in Denver and Toronto and Montreal and Chicago and Kansas City and New York. So half of your league would have to play on the road for a month. That's competitively unfair. You'd probably have to take a break during the June time when everybody else takes a break. That's the best month for Major League Soccer. It's when our weather is the best. It's when our television ratings are the highest. It's when we have the least competition from the other major leagues. And you'd have to break from October or November to February. It's literally impossible today, Ben. But, you know, I've accepted when everybody told us pro soccer will never succeed in America. And I think we've proven that it can succeed. The question is, what can it be? So I've learned also to say, who knows on the calendar, maybe the next guy who's sitting in the chair will figure out some way to do the schedule, and maybe we'll have some roofs on our stadiums and it'll work. It would certainly be a good thing if we could achieve it.
Okay. You know, we joked a little bit about the derby between New York and the fans kicking off a bit, and how that was it's a sign that MLS is coming along. Another one you could argue a milestone is when the head of the league and the head of the federation, or the national team manager, butt heads a little bit. And you and Mr. Klinsmann, the manager of the U.S. national team, have had some differences of opinion as far as where it is best to have young American players playing in your league or abroad. Have you guys kissed and made up, or are you still just going to...
You know, listen, you can't not have a lot of respect for Jurgen Klinsmann. What he's done as a player and what he's done as a coach of our national team sort of speaks for itself. But I am charged with growing professional soccer in our country and trying to lead this growth of a soccer nation. And our league has done a lot to help the growth of the sport in our country. The supporter movement really didn't exist before people became supporters and having supporter sections in MLS stadiums. The broadcasting and marketing and the development programs are all outgrowths of pro soccer, which is what FIFA originally intended when they gave the World Cup to the U.S. in '94. They wanted it to spur the growth of professional men's soccer. So we will always agree to disagree on a lot of different things, and his job is to be the technical director for our sport, and at times that might be in conflict for what we as a pro league are trying to achieve. I get asked a lot, is it better for an MLS player or the development of the game to have all your best young players go overseas? And Jurgen will say it is better, because no matter who they are or what they're paid or what their name is or how much they were paid in a transfer fee, they got to compete every single day, and if they don't, they're going to get transferred or they're going to get loaned out. And that might be true, but we still need to have those American players that are the idols and stars that will help stimulate and spur the growth of the game overall here. So it's a balance. It's great for DeAndre Yedlin to get transferred after being in one of our academies to be playing for Tottenham. But it was really good for the country for Michael Bradley to come home. He was not doing what everybody had hoped he could have done at Roma, and now he's the captain of our national team, and he wasn't when he was in Europe. And now he's doing a great job with Toronto, and arguably, and Jurgen and I may agree or disagree on this, he's a better player. Okay. Right? So I think we'll continually, have issues that we agree on and disagree on. The one thing I will tell you, Jurgen loves our country. He loves being the national team coach, and hopefully he can continue to lead it, and maybe we can do better in the next World Cup.
Can you guys develop world-class players?
We haven't yet, and that's probably the biggest miss that we have. We have not even remotely come close to creating a Lionel Messi or a Wayne Rooney or a Cristiano Ronaldo. And that comes from generations of a culture in those countries that have existed for all of time that we don't yet have in the U.S. and certainly not in Canada. But I believe that time will come. The interesting thing will be, will that come through Major League Soccer? Or will that come from a young 14-year-old who gets nabbed and is going to go play in Milanero or is going to go play in one of the academies around the world? And we're seeing some of that. We're seeing a lot of Jurgen signing a lot of, or calling into the national team, a lot of American kids that are growing up abroad and are growing up in a different cultural environment and in a different academy programs. And so far, right now, those that have come through MLS and those who have gone and never played in MLS, there isn't yet an answer as to whether those players are better than the Michael Bradleys of the world or Clint Dempseys of the world or Landon Donovans of the world. Well, there's still a lot of books, chapters to be written in that book.
Well, 20 years in, you've painted a picture of a lot of momentum and a league on the rise, so congratulations on that. And thank you, and thanks to everybody for joining us. This actually brings to an end the sessions in here. A couple quick notes before you go. If you haven't seen the announcements of next year, Soccerex will be in countries like Ghana and Jordan, back here in Manchester, and they've just announced, and we'll fill out a little bit more information, about a trip to the Americas to Mexico next year. So actually starting after this in the Networking Cafe back on the main floor, there's going to be an update and some more information about the event in Mexico next year. So go ahead and head over there to get some news on that. Hope over the course of the last couple days you've all learned a lot, had a great amount of enjoyment. I know I have. To all of you, and especially to you, Don, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Well done.
Well done.